Well met. This has been Brode, and you're watching Born to be
Cosmo.
Oh, snap.
Welcome to Born to be Cosmo, the podcast where we talk about all things Marvel Snap. We do this twice monthly, and like always, I'm joined by my two fine friends, Nate Wolfe and ZombiesGoNomNom. It's nice to see you, gentlemen. Feel like, Nate, we haven't had a chance to talk to you in a little while,
I
Zombies and I,
know.
because you've been a little busy with some life events. So
Oh my
good life
gosh.
events.
Yeah, I
So,
started
yeah.
this new job and it's great. I got my own office and they're paying me pretty well and everything is cool, but I'm tired. I'm learning a lot of stuff and I've been tired, so I've been playing Snap, but I've been playing pretty casually, and I haven't turned on the computer like since I posted last episode like 2 weeks ago. I've been playing on the iPad and so yeah, I think this might be the first time that I've hit infinite 100% on mobile with no computer, no tracker. So that was an experience. But yeah, no, I've been doing good. It's good to see you guys because I've been kind of off the grid for a couple of weeks, but life is good. I can't complain. I'm doing well. So I'm really happy to be here tonight to hang out with you guys and catch up.
Yeah, and I think this will be good. I think that usually there's so much to talk about, and there's still plenty to talk about tonight. But I feel like, as far as Snap goes, the last 2 weeks have been relatively tame. But there were still some interesting conversations and things that happened. And I think that at this point, 2 weeks into the season, at the halfway mark, the meta has pretty much solidified. There's always room for innovation or surprises, but usually by this point, things are pretty baked in. And, it's going to stay this way pretty much till the end of February. It's a leap year, the 29th. I believe that's when the next scheduled balance changes. And I think we should just get into it.
Yep.
So
sounds good.
Really quickly, this is kind of right after we aired our last episode, there was a minor balance change that shipped with the patch where a few cards were modified. And I think it was pretty much a non-event patch.
Imbalance patch was the term they used.
Yeah. I mean, at first I think people got excited about Omega Red. People got really scared that they killed Beast, and well, Hela Carrier is
I forgot. We didn't cover that OTA. I was thinking the other one.
Then there's Hela Carrier, which nobody seems to really be discussing. I will say that I've been playing a lot of Beast over the last couple weeks, and our favorite little guy is just fine. It's like a side grade more than a nerf. But yeah, so really quickly, since I'm talking about Beast, I can start with Beast, and that probably was the most significant change out of the three. Stat change went from being a 3/4 to a 2/2. However, the discount that Beast places on the cards by 1 now only lasts for the following turn. So, for example, if you play Beast on 4 and you pick up cards, they'll be discounted on 5, but if for whatever reason you don't play them, they'll be back to full price on 6. But I kind of like the change. Beast at 2 always felt better than at 3. I don't know. Have you played with the card a lot, Zombies? I feel like it's still running the same decks. It still does the same thing. It's kind of fine.
That's pretty much been my experience with the card. Is like it's a little bit like worse in some specific case scenarios. Like if you were trying to Beast stuff up for like a wolf turn, but then you didn't want to play the wolf that turn. But it's very niche. I think a lot of people thought it was going to be like really, really rough for him, and Beast is still doing really good things in the decks he was seeing play him before. So it doesn't really feel all that different, other than on turn 3 now you have the opportunity to weave in a 1-drop before you play Beast, which is kind of a nice bonus. So a little bit of pro, a little bit of con, but still like a very relevant card in the decks it was seeing play in before.
All right, well, the next card was Hela Carrier, I'll be honest with you, I forgot that they changed this card, and only when I was preparing the images earlier today was I reminded that this card was changed. And the change was to the text. Instead of adding 3 random cards to your hand, Helicarrier will now fill your hand with random cards when discarded. Honestly, I can't really comment on this, whether it's good or bad. However, at first glance, my impression is that it kind of is worse because you won't draw next turn because it fills your hand. I don't know. I guess if you're playing Helicarrier, maybe you don't want to draw your cards. But
Better with Collector, and I think
Oh,
it's handy with like Gambit combo stuff, possibly. Some people were messing around with it in Loki, like Helicarrier with the Sif Ghost Rider discard package and Loki, which is, more for fun than like super competitive. But like, I think it was a good change. It's just not every change is going to propel a card from being unplayed to a meta player, and that's what this change was. Like, I think it's the Helicarrier is a more interesting card after the change, but I do kind of wish they made it a little bigger, because like it's like this giant aircraft. Shouldn't it be more than like a Sentry worth of stats or a Cull Obsidian worth of stats?
Well, you see, it being kind of middling on stats is a lore win because the only thing I remember about the Helicarrier was A, how ridiculous it was, and B, it
It
being
crashed.
crashing. Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
guess that's fair.
so the lore gamers out there must be really happy about the stat line, right?
I don't know. The Helicarrier has been in the comics for like
Oh, really?
forever. So it's nothing crazy or new. It's just, I don't know. The card is so underwhelming for me, but whatever.
Yeah, but it's got that Dan hit variant, so
The Dan
we're
Hit
all
variant with the face on it is so cute.
Oh, it's fantastic. It's
we're all
the variant's
patiently
great.
we're waiting for Helicarrier to have its day, but this change probably like Beast is more of a side grade.
Yawn.
And I think the next change was the one that caught everyone off guard that I think people were excited about. Omega Red, same stat line, text change. So previously, Omega Red would put +4 power in the other lanes if you were winning the current location it was in by 10. They changed that to +3, so they lowered the bonus by 1. But now you just need to be winning. You don't have to be winning by 10. That's a pretty significant change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Omega Red found its way onto ladder. And generally when I ran into it, it fed me cubes. I think it's probably good in kind of the tribunal style decks. I think that's where it really kind of, found a home. I don't think those decks are particularly good, but anything that kind of adds to your power, multiplier for the tribunal stuff is probably worth a look. And this
I've
does
seen it
that.
in Lockdown a bit where they use it like in their storm lane. So if they win the storm lane, they get the Omega Red buff, and then they can boost the Omega Red lane with like Miss Marvel or Doom later. Kind of a neat idea. Like good change, but I don't like. I think we're starting to see the impact of like you only have 12 deck slots, right? And you want to be running like the best cards you can for your deck, and Omega Red just doesn't make the cut in a lot of decks, even though he's a lot better now than he was. Like, he's playable. It also made me realize that I tried to play some Spectrum decks, and every time I try and play a Spectrum deck, I realize it looks just like a worse version of the Tribunal combo. And I feel like, at least for now, Spectrum is like eternally doomed to just be a worse version of the Tribunal combo decks, because those decks actually put out a lot of power, and Spectrum decks don't really.
Yeah, Spectrum, another card that's gotten, buffs and still kind of
Make
not
her plus
really.
3, maybe. That might be too good. I don't know, but
Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe they tested it like they did moving Valk to 4 instead of 5. So yeah, those were the balance changes, and it really didn't change a whole lot. And we were expecting an OTA this past week because I forget the cadence of schedule. It's
Pono.
patch, OTA. Oh, why don't I'm not even going to attempt to decode that acronym. If
We
you'd
got
be so
an
kind.
OTA.
Yeah. So patch OTA, nothing OTA. I
Okay.
think I don't know if Interrobang coined that or not, but he's the one I saw posted a bunch. So like it's
Yeah.
stuck in my head, and it's not always true during like the holidays. It changes sometimes, but generally that is the cadence they stick to. Is there's a full client patch, there's an OTA the following week, there is an off week, then there's an OTA, and then the cycle repeats itself with a patch.
Well, we didn't get a patch, but instead we got a amusing event for Valentine's Day, whereby cards would receive a power bonus if the pair is in play. So this was difficult to explain. We can see if I've managed to do it any better. So one example of a pairing is Angela and Sarah. Angela is a 2/2 base. Sarah is a 5/4 base. If both Angela and Sarah happen to be in play, Angela will become a 2/3 base, and Sarah will become a 5/5 base. And so there were a few different couples that have this bonus. So scaling at 2 apiece is Captain America and Agent 13, Gambit and Rogue, Invisible Woman and Mr. Fantastic, She-Hulk and Daredevil. It's interesting. And then for +1 power for each in the pair, Angela and Sarah, Black Panther and Nakia, Iron Man and Rescue, Spider-Man Miles Morales and Ghost Spider. And there were 2 others as well for +1, Star-Lord and Gamora, and Vision and Scarlet Witch. So from a game balance perspective, it hasn't been overpowered, but it also has been relevant for a lot of decks that would run some of those cards. But I think that the biggest news of the couples was not the couples announced, but the couples that didn't quite make the cut.
Yeah. All right.
And I think Nate had some thoughts on that.
I have a huge list. Okay, first off, all right, I don't go down the lore path very often, but I'm gonna do it real quick. I'll be fast though. Okay,
That's
so
okay.
number one, the Daredevil pairing here is super weird. Okay,
Yep.
Like-
Elektra got robbed.
like Daredevil's been with like everybody. Okay, it's like the Human Torch. Okay, but Daredevil and She-Hulk doesn't make any sense. They're both lawyers. Okay, that's about it. But they could have picked like Elektra seems like
Well, it's an
obvious
MCU
choice.
thing, right? Like I think.
But it's just like Daredevil and Elektra is the classic.
Yes,
they
they
could
even
have
had
done-
that in the video. Remember the hero
hero
video
one,
they did a
yeah.
while ago? Yeah.
Right? And they could have done Daredevil with Black Widow. They were a couple for a long time in the comics. But Daredevil and Elektra seem the obvious. Now, the ones that they missed that were super obvious, well, the big one anyways, Cyclops and Jean Grey, right?
Mhm.
Like, how could you not? They got married in the comics. It was like a huge thing. And then Medusa and Black Bolt, like, they're the king and queen of the Inhumans. Like, they missed that. We just finished up, like, Kyara and Hulk. That's a big one. Ant-Man and the Wasp. Like they just missed a bunch. And then there's some lesser known ones. So Crystal and Quicksilver are married in the comics. Luke Cage and Jessica Jones. Cloak and Dagger. That's a big one.
Yeah, they should have done that. They
Like-
should have done Cloak and Dagger.
Come on. And the cards, like they're both move cards. Like they actually work together anyways. Colossus and Kitty Pryde. Shanna and Khazar they could have done.
That would have been nice for the zoo enjoyers.
Havoc and Polaris. Iron Fist and Misty Knight are a couple. And the last one, Thanos and Death. There you go. So, yeah, they missed a lot. I think that's all of them. I went through all of them, and those were the ones that I caught. But I was like, how do you miss Jean Grey and Cyclops? Come on now.
Yeah, I think they responded to like, you were not the only one who had these questions. So I don't know the exact responses, but they responded to some Discord questions about it. And the TLDR, I think, was they wanted a variety of pairings from like different canons. So because some people are asking like, why no Storm and Black Panther? like from the video.
True.
With Electra specifically, they were like, well, we changed Electra kind of recently, and she's like a new player card, so we don't want her being changed all the time, which I think is a weird logic, but whatever. And then the bigger thing is like, why didn't you do more? And it's like, well, this is the first time we're testing this feature, so we wanted to start off a bit smaller and see how everything went, and then go from there. Which, like, fair enough. It's a shame. Like the Gene Cyclops one, it should have been in there.
I didn't
Like,
expect
it
him to
should have
get.
been in there.
I didn't expect him to get all, but that was just a major one that seemed like, oh.
They
yes.
also picked more commonly available cards. I think that also played into it. Like, if you look at this list, I think everything with the exception of Ghost Spider is Series 3 or below, and a lot of them are Series 2 or below. And I think that was part of the intention for this, is they wanted to see what impact this had on, like, they wanted people to be included with it, even if you were probably like a newer player. Which is like fair enough, I guess.
They have offered
conceptually, yeah.
I was going to say they have offered Ghost Spider in the
the bundle,
in the spotlight,
right?
and also in the spotlight caches like multiple times. Like
Yeah.
they'll skip over other cards, but they've put.
They
her
repeat
in.
the season pass cards a bunch, and that's something. It's a weird thing where it's like, if you buy the pass, you probably find that very annoying. But I think it's probably good for the free to play people, because if they miss a season pass card and then they miss like the opportunity, it's good for it to come back, because those, weren't available for a while. And then some of them, it's weird. Like, we still haven't had Miss Marvel, right? Like, Miss Marvel still hasn't come yet. I think she's coming next month, I want to say. But like, Miss Marvel was a November season pass card. It's kind of crazy that she was like a meta defining card, and they still, so it's weird. They're like the way they select spotlights is weird, is I guess what I'm trying to say. But conceptually, like, I think this type of event is cool. It's like, I like when card games do stuff that is unique to a digital medium.
Yes.
I think, if I wanted to play a purely paper card game, I'd play a purely paper card game. So it's cool to see them experiment with different stuff they can do in the medium. And I also like that something like this, they can do some wacky out there stuff, and they don't have to worry about the long-term ramifications. Like, none of these power couples were OP, but let's say hypothetically one or two of them were like dominating and actually like core parts of the meta. They don't have to worry about like, how is this going to affect the game when we release, our next set of cards or whatever. I kind of like.
I like that for a company that prides itself, or a game that prides itself on like constantly shaking up the meta, that they can do a short-term meta shakeup on a minor scale without nerfing or permanently modifying a bunch of cards. So this is a way to do that. I saw Snapzone had an article about, hey, here's some decks to play that have the power couples, and it's like, all right, that's cool, and it shakes things up for a week or whatever without like permanently altering the cards. It's kind of fun.
And it makes these, underplayed cards a little more experimented with. I think the one most people really like is and I've seen some people want this one to stick around, is the Captain America Agent 13 one. And, people have been asking for a Captain America buff for forever.
Oh, yeah,
they were
card's
like,
terrible. So
he's so iconic. Why does Captain America suck? And now, like, he definably doesn't suck with Agent 13. Like, he's actually pretty good. The main deck I've seen it is like Loki, because card generation, and it's pretty decent there. I played a Sarah deck with only power couples, which was actually kind of fun. Didn't do as badly as I thought I would with it. It was because a lot of the cards, you just play a lot of the cheaper cards, and then Sarah makes them even cheaper, and it actually worked kind of well. Like, I think this is a great thing for Snap, is very much a more casually focused game. And so any excuse you give people to just mess around and have fun with cards they don't normally play is cool. Like, I think that as someone who's wanted to play Rescue for a long time, it gave me a little bit of a reason to play Rescue, even though it puts her into Shang-Chi range, which is not great.
Yeah, it sounds like a week seems like the right amount of time.
Yeah.
Feels like we've learned our lessons from the notorious Doom in the Tomb event from
Oh yeah.
Hearthstone Standard, where that lasted for far longer than I
Like
think.
a month or maybe even
I think it
longer.
was longer. Yeah, I don't know. Anyways, yeah, and it's cool for people who want to experiment, but also it's not really that big of a change if you kind of want to sidestep it. It almost feels optional. Although I did win a big game off of District decks where I had Scarlet Witch in my deck, and I got a generated vision and played that on the last turn for an 8 cuber on ladder, which was really sweet.
Ooh.
That's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
that was
Also,
pricey. Yeah.
uh, what's his name? Absorbing Man is like the third wheel because I don't the way they like made these interactions work is weird, but if you copy the on reveal of an on reveal of one of these power couple cards, even though the effect itself is not an on reveal because you're copying the card, I
Mhm.
believe it still procs the effect. Um,
All
and
right.
Rogue can also be weird with that. Like I ran
Yeah.
into a bug where I think if you have Rogue out first and she copies something, it sometimes messes with Gambit giving her the proper buff if you play him after, because Rogue is like a weird designed card in terms of like when it steals the ability. Um, so there's some like weird fringe things with it, but it's interesting if nothing else. Like it's cool. Like people have been asking for a long time, like, hey, when are we gonna do like factions or something? Like when can we get a bonus for playing the X-Men together and stuff? And I think this event shows us that they'll probably do something like that at some point in time, like maybe even next season, because next season I think is like Avengers versus X-Men or something.
Yep.
Oh, interesting.
Um,
It was a cool event in the comics.
so maybe we'll see something like that. I don't know how often they're going to do these. I don't think they should do them too overly often. But if they're in, if they're once in a blue moon, I kind of like the idea that they do them with a holiday or something. Because it's not a holiday every month, at least not a big one every month, and so you can space it out a bit. What generally the reception seemed really positive from most people. Although I did see some people dislike the fact that we got this over an OTA. And someone actually asked the developers, hey, when you planned this out, did you do this because you thought the meta was in a good place and you didn't really need to do an OTA, so this was a good time for this? And the reality apparently is that it was really just kind of a happy coincidence. Like because they have to plan this like and get all this done further in advance, it just happened to kind of work out that it happened during a time when a lot of people are generally happier with the state of balance than we've seen in more recent months of Snap. So it was kind of just like it happened to work out. That's nice, and it's good that it went that way because if this happened during a time when, let's say, Blob was the dominating the whole game, I think it would have been less positively received, taking the place of an OTA. Some people still weren't happy about it. I think some more competitively minded folks were like, this shouldn't have replaced an OTA, which I can understand, but at least it happened at a good time.
Right. Well, I think that's a good segue because Marvel Snap gamers spend more time arguing about Marvel Snap than actually playing it. But Zombies, you shared this with me, and I kind of was like, at this point, I shouldn't be surprised by bad takes.
Mhm.
But this one kind of really demands one attention. So this was taken from the Discord, the main
Yeah, the
Discord,
main
if I'm
Discord.
not mistaken.
Mhm.
And I'm going to read this person's opinion on spotlight keys. The post is entitled, "Why is hogging of spotlight keys allowed? It is very easy to get pool 4 or 5 cards with the current system, and this benefits new players, which is a good thing. However, there is no way newer players can beat older players that hog over 20 plus keys, even if they swipe the credit card. Will Second Dinner consider increasing the difficulty of obtaining the cards, or consider giving expiration date / max limit to obtaining spotlight key? So if that didn't make sense to you, that's okay. I had to read it a couple times to decode what was being said. But in essence, what the person is trying to communicate is that they feel that the game is too inexpensive, and that by increasing the price of resources, this would further gatekeep people from obtaining them, and that would then
Well, not even
be
increasing, right? Just like punishing the people who have more than X amount, right?
right.
Like,
Yeah,
which is such a
weird.
out
Yeah.
there concept. It's like, and also a big part of the statement isn't even true. Like, if you do want a lot more spotlight keys, I promise you, swiping the credit card a handful of times will help you in that
Oh
department.
yes.
Maybe, you might have to swipe a bit more than you might want to, which is something the company's probably happy about. But yeah, you can spend money and catch up on having a lot of keys. Like, so that I found kind of funny.
This is one of the worst takes I've ever seen.
Well, so
Yeah,
here's the
yeah, that's why I
thing.
was like, this is the worst snap take
So-
I've ever read.
I think this reveals too, like, so if I move past the obvious, which is very amusing, if I reflect upon this, I'm struck by one thing, which is kind of two things. I suspect that whomever wrote this was probably a child, very young. I can't prove it, but just a feeling I have. But I am oftentimes surprised that Marvel Snap's demographic skews a lot younger than um, other card games not called Pokemon. Or at least it seems that way. I wish that we could get data that would confirm or deny that. But just anecdotally, it does seem like it skews a bit younger, and so I think that kind of is what partially creates the discourse around some of the more bizarre opinions some people hold.
Yeah, I think
But
that's part of it. It's also like, I think that back when Hearthstone came out, it was not only like first to market in terms of like big card game, but one of the biggest strengths of Hearthstone way back when was it took an IP that was really popular at the time and made a cool game in that universe. And I think Snap is really the first time in a long time we're seeing that happen again with other card games. The only other recent example I would think of is like Legends of Runeterra, and you may or may not have heard that hasn't gone as well in recent months due to actually monetization issues. Funnily enough, it was the most free to play friendly card game, and it's not getting a whole lot of support anymore because they couldn't find a way to make money. And so, we want the game to be more accessible, but it's also important to point out like they do actually have to make money to make the game. And I know Runeterra was always brought up, as I brought it up a bunch too. Like, hey, this is a great example of how you can have a solid game without having to charge a lot of money. And if Riot can't make that work with, Riot, huge IP, League of Legends giant, if they can't make that work like on a very player friendly, low spending model, who can? I really don't know.
so did this? So I'm curious. Hogging spotlight keys. How
Mhm.
many spotlight keys do you have, Nate? Just curious.
4
4.
right now.
I
That's
have-
like current, but I had a bunch, but I wanted that variant for last week's card, not Cull, the
Super
one
Giant?
before that.
Super Giant, yeah.
Yeah. I like the variant, and so I spent a whole mess of keys to get it, which was probably a poor decision. But so I
But
went
you're
from
not hogging them, so
I went
that's
from
good.
8 down to 4, so I've got 4 right
wow.
now.
So it was still single digits, right? Like,
Right.
I think this person is vastly overestimating how many keys the average player has.
How many
Oh my
keys do you
gosh.
have, zombies?
I plead the fifth. No, I think I have
35.
23.
Oh my god.
But
Damn.
also, I think there's like a real big disconnect because like I think the people they're seeing are content creators, because those are the people who you're not going to see average players' keys, right? Because average players, they just play the game, right? Whereas the people posting about the game often have a lot more resources. That's so weird. Well, I'll let you in on a secret. Don't tell anyone I told you this, but most content creators have spent a lot of money to get those resources.
Yeah, it's not like they get this stuff for free, man. I mean,
No.
we're on the good list, and we get like the little bit of free stuff, and it's not
Or
very much.
2,000 broad bucks a
Hey,
month.
you
Yeah.
guys get that. I don't even qualify.
Yet.
You know, all that just to say, I don't know. I thought this was an amusing post, but it kind of really
People
shows
loved it. It was
the
very
weird,
funny.
yeah, yeah. The
Oh, it's
discourse around the
bizarre, man.
game's economy is kind of like still
It's just weird. Yeah,
weird. It's
I don't know.
ridiculous.
I do think so from my position, one of the things that definitely gave me a boost was the fact that they had an oversight when they first introduced the spotlight system.
Right.
They either couldn't prevent people from double dipping, or they thought it would be a smaller amount of people than those that did. But yeah, I certainly took advantage of it, and that left me with a lot more tokens, and I'm still sitting on a large pile of tokens in part because of taking advantage of like the double dipping when spotlights came out like 7-8 months ago.
Yeah,
So that
it's
was really helpful, and I don't think they're ever going to let something like that slip through again. Because
No, they said they'd open everyone's chests or something. That
yeah,
was like the
yeah,
outrage a couple of weeks ago.
Huh.
All right, well, I kind of want to not focus on the game economy tonight. I mean, I wanted to
sure.
touch on this because it was, a laugh out loud moment, and I
It was
can't
pretty
pass
funny.
up. But I did want to talk a little bit about the season pass card. We don't usually do a deep dive on the season pass card, but I think that both Black Swan and Cull Obsidian warrant a little bit of a tangent, so to speak. So just full disclosure, I'm a Black Swan enjoyer. I really like the card. It's not one that's really kind of taken the meta by storm, like Loki. But I think it is really
Thank
good.
God.
Sure,
We
I
don't
mean
need
we
more
don't.
Lokis.
Yeah, but I think that the card is competitively viable, and it's in some of the defining meta staples right now, and some off meta picks as well. So kind of the first deck I think that probably warrants attention is what Nate piloted to Infinite. And I thought that was a pretty amusing story because you didn't have a lot of time to
Well,
experiment. So you just kind of let the game pilot it for you, right?
so here's what happened, right? Like I've been playing a lot of Days Gone, and it's really good. I've been playing and I've been working a lot and just trying to wrap my brain around a lot of new stuff. And so I log in to do my daily quests, and I've got like play a bunch of 1-cost cards, play 4-cost cards, play 6-cost cards, fill up a whole lane with 4 cards. Oh, and you got to play Cull Obsidian, and you got to play Black Swan. I was like, I know what to do. And so
There you go.
and so I plopped in Black Swan and Cull Obsidian and hit autocomplete, thinking that it would make a Thanos deck, which it did. It made a Thanos Lockjaw deck, which I'm very comfortable piloting, and it was like, oh, sweet, this is great. And it's really like the standard, quote unquote standard, like Thanos Lockjaw deck with Wave swapped out for Black Swan. And it's good. I am a Black Swan enjoyer as well, even when it doesn't fully like pop off. You usually get something for it, but it's overstated anyways. It's an interesting card, and I wanted boosters for it anyways because I really like the variant. And yeah,
Cull
and then
Obsidian is also now pretty much a must-have for Lockjaw Thanos. I think
oh
that
gosh, yeah, the card
it's
It's really good.
Yeah.
Thanos is like, it's funny if we look at this Thanos deck. Now you don't need Black Swan, right?
No.
Black Swan's probably not technically optimal, although it's fine. Like you're not gaining much or losing much by including it. I've tried it both with and without, and I found that I thought it would get all this value because you have all the stones and Thanos, but in practice, I found it to be kind of mid
Yeah.
in terms of like how often it works. But you also have a 3/5, so it's like It's okay.
It's
But
not bad, but yeah, I agree with you.
you don't need it. So, but the point I want to make is that Thanos has become the quote unquote pay to win deck. Because a lot of the decks right now in the meta are actually relatively budget friendly. They don't have like a crazy amount of high series cards. Except Thanos.
Oh yeah,
Thanos.
true.
Let's look at this. Jeff, Series 5. Kyera, recent release, relatively, Series 5. Cull Obsidian, Series 5. Blob, Series 5. Thanos, Series 5. Scar, Battle Pass card, Series 5. So like as
Yeah,
far as decks that are more on the expensive side, Thanos like takes the cake there. And with the addition of Cull Obsidian, I've seen people say, and I can kind of believe that it might have tipped Thanos just a bit again to where he's probably the best deck right now. It's not like with Blob where it was the best deck by a mile. Like you can still compete with other stuff, whereas pre-nerf Blob you really couldn't compete with other stuff very well. But I do think Cull Obsidian pushed this deck over the line a
yeah,
little bit in terms of it's just so strong. Having another big thing that helps make your scar smaller, that helps you when it pops out of Lockjaw. This is like the Thanos deck is it's like a jack of all trades. It does everything. Sometimes it's a mid-range deck and it just plays out stones and some big cards and goes that way. You can react with Shang-Chi. You can put out so much power in multiple lanes to where you don't have to worry about getting Shang-Chi'd yourself because you either have Kyera or you're putting so much power in multiple lanes that if they Shang-Chi one of your lanes, it's not enough to win the other two. You have Magneto to like mess up opponents who are relying on 4-drops. It's just like this is a Swiss Army knife deck,
yeah,
and not many other decks in the game can really have that like same claim to where they can be kind of like a mid-range deck, or you could say the Lockjaw element is combo s because you're just cheating so much mana, and it also just is efficient. Like it's a very very efficient deck. So there are a few different versions, but basically the core of it is if you remove Black Swan and Jeff seem to be the two flex spots. I've seen a bunch of different versions. The one I play has Wave over Black Swan and Leech over Jeff right now. But Black Swan is the main flex spot.
Yeah.
10 of the cards in this list are like solidified. You can play it without Cull, but Cull does make a meaningful difference. So like if you want to be a Thanos one trick, I would prioritize getting Cull Obsidian.
Oh yeah, the only thing that threw me off a little bit, and I agree with you, I think Black Swan is suboptimal, but I wanted the gold.
Yeah, it's good for boosters and doing your quests, and it doesn't make it a bad deck by any means.
No, but I think Wave is probably the better pick there. But and I agree with you. Just from anecdotal experience, I found that the discounted stones, like I wasn't like I drew a ton of them. I mean, often enough, but not like I didn't find her to be super useful. Someone in chat said that Black Swan are playing the stones, and Black Swan and Devil Dino have anti-synergy, which is sort of true, but the stones typically draw more cards, so it's not that bad.
Yeah, it's a minor thing, and it's just it's weird. Like you want to play your stones and Thanos, and most of the time, like it's hard to time this card in a way where you haven't already had time to play your stones. Because if you have stones early, you are playing them to cycle to get your other cards. And so by the time you play Black Swan on 3, you probably have been playing your stones. So unless your stones drew into other stones, she's really only reducing 1 or 2. But yeah, so the value is very minimal. I thought it would be better than it was in Thanos. It's a little bit better in like a zoo style Thanos, but even there, I found it's funny. A lot of people called Black Swan power creep because they're like, oh, you're releasing a 3/5 with like no downside. But Black Swan does have a downside. And the downside is you have to have enough 1-cost cards in your deck to actually get value from this effect. And that is a very legitimate downside when 1-cost cards are kind of mediocre. Like Thanos doesn't run any 1-cost cards. It's just the stones, because the stones are good. But that means you're not getting crazy value out of it. I mean, so you're happy with the 3/5 body, but the effect isn't actually. I think people thought the effect would be a lot stronger than it is.
Yeah, I moved back to Wave in Lockjaw Thanos. Cull Obsidian, though, I would just say that we're going to be looking at kind of the overall meta, but in a little bit. But really, like it's oftentimes difficult to give advice on what cards to purchase. And for those that are live, if you've been on the fence about Cull Obsidian, it's probably the one card that you want to get this month. It's just been
Yeah, it's probably the best
Oh,
card this month.
it's very good.
It's a little boring though. Like if you're not prioritizing like optimizing a Thanos or a Zabu deck, or just like trying to win as much as you can, I do think it's a little bit of a boring card. Like it's not that exciting. It's just big.
The one thing that I will say about Cole that kept throwing me off, because the card's new and I'm still getting used to it, was I like Kyara, and it was great with like, hey, cool, you can't kill my Scar, Thanos, Blob, Magneto, but guess what? You can kill Cole.
Yeah.
And that one threw me off a couple of times. Like I kept getting Shang-Chi'd, and I was like, dang it. And so, be aware. Shang-Chi is everywhere. But yeah, I mean,
50% of decks, according to Snap.fan statistics.
I believe it.
That surprised, yeah.
Yeah,
I believe it.
He's the real meta tyrant. But
Well, we'll talk about that after. I think that certainly there's some reasons why. My Black Swan Cull Obsidian adventures took a pretty different turn from Nate. I've been playing a lot of Bounce, and this is a deck that Safety Blade came up with. It was actually a deck that was first made by a player named Shuri Enjoyer, and then Safety modified it when Cull Obsidian was releasing. And I did this for my weekend missions slash and gameplay, and this did really well for me. I think Black Swan is really the most impactful as a bounce card. Its 3 cost lines up nicely with Falcon. So oftentimes, the dreams to beast on 4. Get all your 1-drops back in hand, play them on 5 alongside Falcon and Black Swan, so that you can play them again on 6. Honestly, this happens pretty often. The sequencing can change. Sometimes you'll do it in the inverse. But even if you're only pulling back 1 or 2 cards, it's incredibly strong. Like you can hit Iceman like 3-4 times in a game. It's
Oof.
devastating. And of course, these are all on reveals. So Black Swan, Falcon, Beast go really nicely with Werewolf by Night, which is still a very powerful scaling card. It grows really quickly when you're able to pair it with a lot of cheap on reveals, which the Bounce Shell does. There are a few different variations of these decks. Some of them are running the Annihilus package. Some of them are running Hitmonkey still. Cull really makes sense in this deck because it's how to say, it's a conditionless Hitmonkey. And you've got all these premium 1-drops that pair with it. It just really works. I climbed quite a bit on ladder with this, and also managed to get an infinity ticket with it as well on stream, which says something, because unlike ZombiesGoNomNom, who's a professional streamer, I don't stream that often, and I play worse because there's a lot going on. You got chat, and I don't know, it's just a lot of things going on. Anyway, so yeah, got an infinity ticket, a few hundred SP, and my weekend mission's done.
Nice.
It feels good. I'm really looking forward to getting the battle pass variant, like you are, Nate, for Black Swan.
Yeah, I like the art a lot.
She's super cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this deck is really good. It definitely, and I'm sure you can speak to this having played it a bunch. It takes time to learn. Like Werewolf is probably the highest skill cap card in Marvel Snap, and it's the one that probably punishes you the most for making a small mistake or a few small mistakes. but it's satisfying to learn. I really like this deck. I played it a bunch too. I was playing Hood in I think the Ham spot, which I think Hood is still good even if you don't run a
Yeah.
Nihilus. But it's really just personal preference. Like it could be either card. The deck still does really good things.
Well, so I think that intersects with what you were saying, Zombies, about the card being difficult. So I own Werewolf by Night, and for eagle-eyed viewers that are watching this on YouTube or us live, that is the Spotlight variant for Werewolf by Night when Werewolf by Night released. This card's become something a little bit of my white whale. I'm not very good at playing it, and I made such a large investment into acquiring it for reasons that we can get into later, but a lot of low rolls on the spotlights that week. The card's very difficult to play. And I think that the card's difficulty increases as you add card generation to your game plan. So like in the version that I have on screen here, this is a lot easier to manage Wolf because you're just having to concentrate on managing Wolf and not hand size. When you add in Hood, which is a very good card in the Balance Shell and with Werewolf by Night, now all of a sudden you have to manage the Hood on board and the demons in hand. And the next evolution up from this is a deck that really doesn't see any play anymore other than by Safety Blade themselves, with Snowguard and Loki, and a lot of hand generation. That's really difficult to manage. So, I think this card is hard, but if you're struggling with it, by removing the generation, like we have in the list here, it's a good starting point, if you're struggling with it as well. And if you're not, well, all the power to you. I think that after a couple months of brute forcing Wolf, I'm finally starting to get into the black with it. But yeah, it's like the only card in Snap that has really given me trouble.
It's hard. It's legitimately not a easy card to play, and it's also one of the few cards in the game that you feel the punish when something goes wrong.
Yeah.
A lot harder than other decks. I think a lot of other decks are a bit more forgiving.
But yeah, this has been a shell that I've been enjoying, and I've been getting a real kick out of trying to find applications for Black Swan. So definitely, if you're watching this live, you have about 12 hours left to complete your weekend missions. Or if you are on the fence about getting Cull Obsidian, it's your last chance. I would say get Cull Obsidian.
Yeah.
And pray to Ben Brode that Cull Obsidian does not get nerfed anytime soon. If you do decide,
how do you even nerf?
I
there was a post about Cull Obsidian that I also found very humorous.
Oh, that's a good segue because I think we were gonna share that actually.
Oh, were we? Oh, great.
Yeah,
I wasn't sure if we were gonna talk about that.
Yeah. No. This has to be read. So I'll read this out, and then you can kind of go into your anecdote, Zombies. But this also was posted on the official Snap Discord, and then I think purged by
it was
moderation.
purged 1984.
Okay. 1984. So the post is entitled "Cull Obsidian is just broken. Typhoid Mary, Sentry, Atuma. All these cards have downsides that require extra assistance in order to get maximum effectiveness out of. We have cards like Black Cat and Crossbones with stat lines similar to the aforementioned cards, but have harder requirements to actually play. The next paragraph is in caps. Then here comes Schlong Dongus Cull Obsidian with a 410 stat line, just like the first three cards. 0 downsides, and has the easiest condition to meet, which you can meet in the same turn you place him. Look, I think power creep is going to happen, but this is just egregious. He put classes oh, I think this was a typo.
Yeah,
he outclasses all other raw power cards with similar stat lines. What were y'all thinking, honestly? And I have to give credit. I have an ear for language. I like fancy words. To write a post of that length and include words such as egregious along with Schlong Dongus.
it's quality. It was this week. I don't peek into the normal sections of the Snap Discord very often, and I felt very rewarded for the things I found
it's
this week.
so funny. I've been laughing at this for days now. It's great.
Here's the thing, they deleted this, and as far as Snap discourse goes, this is pretty innocent. I think like the fact that like a full paragraph was written in caps is more offensive than long Schlong Dongus, but whatever, I'm not gonna. Yeah.
I'm just so happy we got that I'll never call Obsidian anything else. It's I even called him that in my deck post this week with him. It's just like it's very funny.
It's so good.
I also love the part where they're naming the cards at the beginning. It makes me think of like the intro to Avatar: The Last Airbender, where they're naming the Earth, Water, Fire, Air, and they're just naming the 4 drops.
Oh God.
And
yeah,
it's very funny. But it's interesting to talk about, like, is Cull Obsidian power creep? And one, power creep, like, that train has left the station.
Yeah,
Like,
really.
power creep will happen. Power creep has happened. Like, this is not the first power. I think the main point, like, I don't think stats wise the card is that power creep, but I do think it is a little bit power creep on an old mechanic, which is like the mechanic for Crossbones, right? Not or being able to stage it in the same turn. Now they work very differently, like the restrictions are different, so I think it makes sense what they did with this. But it also does make the card way, way better. Like, if you couldn't play a 1-drop the same turn you played Cull Obsidian, he would be a notably worse card. Still probably decent card, but a notably worse card if you had to set it up beforehand. So you could argue there's a little bit of power creep there, but I also think there's an argument for, making, like, it's a weird line to toe because people get mad if cards are too good, and then people also get mad if cards are too bad. So it's like, how do you find that perfect balance? And it's pretty hard to do.
Well,
and
I'll tell you how you don't find it. You don't find it with long Schlong Dongus.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, when I posted this, because I also posted this on Twitter and people got a kick out of it, but it was funny seeing the comments that there were a surprising amount of people who agreed with this sentiment, which is funny to me because, like, they're talking about Sentry like he has this big downside when Sentry's probably like one of the biggest raw stats cards in the game because of the addition of Annihilus.
Yeah, it's a 420.
It's like, yes, you have to figure out how to mitigate that or whatever if you don't get your Annihilus, but like Sentry is more stats generally than Mr. Dongus is here. So I don't know. It's the funny thing though is seeing the people who did think it was power creep or did think he was too good. It was very amusing seeing people try to figure out how to nerf this card if they wanted to, because like you can't really
make it a
change it
4/9. I dare you.
Yeah, that's what it was. I believe pre-release it was a 4/9, and
that's a buff.
The card would arguably be better in a bunch of instances because of being a 4/9. So it's like you can't really do that. You can't really change the mana cost without drastically changing other parts of the card. So it's a weird card in terms of, I'm not saying it needs to be nerfed. It's a new card. It's strong, but I don't think oppressive. But like in a hypothetical world where they want to, like, I don't know how they'd tweak that. Like, the only thing I could think of is if they messed with the staging of having to have the 1 cost card there first. But I think that would make it I like a lot worse. I think that would make the card actively go from being a pretty good card to probably being a pretty bad card. And they are also overstating like the fact that there's no downside. There is downside. Like, I play this in one of the decks we're going to show where there are only 2 1-drops in my deck. And sometimes that is problematic. Like, sometimes if you're only running 2, most are running 3, but if you only have 2 or 3, sometimes you don't have a 1-drop down, or your 1-drop is not in the lane where you necessarily want your 10 power to go. Like, saying this card has no restriction is an oversimplification. It's
Yes.
having played it a bunch. It's not true. It
So
it is a real thing.
You nerf this card by nerfing Lockjaw.
Yeah, well, you nerf like 3 crazy. Well, I guess two like of the best decks in the game by nerfing Lockjaw at this point.
Well,
Which the movement
yeah.
is growing. The
Yeah,
movement
so let's
is
talk
growing.
about the meta a little bit. I think that's a good segue. So you know, I mentioned at the start that the meta has really kind of solidified in the last few days, and I think that Untapped and Snap Fan and you know the data aggregation sites kind of are all showing the same thing, which is the meta is centering around Hela decks that run Lockjaw, Destroy decks, and Lockjaw Thanos, and then
And
kind of
Zabu piles.
yeah, in as a distant fourth, Zabu piles. Although it's funny because people are saying like Zabu's a problem, and it may well be a problem. But what I find interesting is that Zabu is the engine necessary for all the other decks to even kind of stand a
Compete.
chance to
Yeah.
compete with what I've just put out there. And really, this has kind of been a trend since last season when Scar came out with Big Dumb Idiots, just
Mhm.
increasingly putting up bigger stat piles. Hela, stat piles, Destroy, stat piles, and Lockjaw Thanos. You know, one of the things that I thought was really interesting, KMBest released their kind of mini tier list every Sunday. Cut Leech from Lockjaw Thanos because it's just better to lean into stats. And you know, I think that that's telling if that is indeed true. And so really, if you're not playing Hela, Destroy, Lockjaw Thanos, or a Zabu pile, you're probably having a pretty rough time of it. And you know,
It's an
it's
uphill
just
battle, right?
yeah,
Like it's not impossible to win with other decks, but it's harder. There's no doubt about the fact that it is harder to win with other decks. Like those
I,
are the tier 1 decks, and everything else is at least a notch below it. You have to either run Shang-Chi to try and stop it, or you have like you you need to plan with those decks in mind, or you're going to have a bad time.
Yep.
yeah. I mean, you either need to be able to compete with a certain level of point generation, or you need to be able to disrupt that point generation. And so Zabu's kind of like the disruptor. So I'd actually, I agree with what you say, zombies, but I would add to that by saying that if you are playing the disruptor role, i.e. the Zabu decks, it does still feel kind of uphill even for those decks as well, right?
They
And
definitely can, especially
yeah,
because like they don't get Zabu every game, right?
right.
And you could say, well, the Hela decks don't get Hela every game, but I think because of things like Lockjaw and Jubilee and whatnot, they're seeing more of their deck, and that's why it's funny. There's been like more discourse about Hela in the last week because it's kind of similar to Loki in a way where a lot of people at the top are playing Hela, and other people at the top don't really like that because Hela is very RNG heavy. It's like, well, my opponent can't counter my play because even I don't know where my cards are going. And also they throw priority really well, so typical like reactionary decks aren't able to work with verse it very well. Like your
Yep.
best bet is like sniping it with a Cosmo or an Alioth, which is hard to do most of the time. Odds are not in your favor. So that's created some frustration for people, which I think is understandable. And there's this classic snap discourse, which I always find really funny. And it happens every time a card that was previously underplayed or previously bad finds its way into a top tier deck. You will get people coming out of the woodwork saying, nah, Hela's been around for forever and she's never been a problem. People just like to complain. Or you'll get the people who are like, well, I actually played Hela before it was popular. I knew it was good all along. You guys are late to the party. And it's really funny when you see stuff like that because I think a lot of people just are new to card games or don't really understand that context is everything in card games. And I can promise you, if you went back and looked or played Hela for most of Snap's lifespan, you were really struggling to get 50% win rate. It was a deck that often had below a 50% win rate for most of Snap's life, but sometimes you'd steal cubes with it because people wouldn't respect it. But you were also paying a lot of cubes for those games where, let's say Blade discarded the wrong card back when it was random, or you don't draw your Hela before it was a Lockjaw deck. So like these people weren't really ahead of the game, but suddenly feel very vindicated when this deck is good months later. And this has happened with like I see this all the time where it's like, oh no, I knew. And it's like, it's not the gotcha you think it is, saying you were playing this before it was cool, because like there's a very high chance it wasn't actually good then. Like card games are all about context.
With
Mhm.
one, that's true all the time, with one exception.
What's that?
Ghost.
Yeah, we were right about Ghost. Yeah.
I was right about Ghost over a year ago.
Yeah.
That's different. That's
We
being
knew it. It is
prophetic.
different.
Yeah. No,
It's because we're content creators. It makes it different.
You're a content creator, sir. But no, in all seriousness, I think that's quite right. The context is really important. The cards have changed significantly, and also the cards that interact have changed as well. A lot of these
cards have changed. Yeah, like the Snap things change in Snap a lot. Another great example of this is I saw someone earlier asking, why doesn't Shadow King see a lot of play anymore? He's good against, like Blob and Destroy and whatnot. Why did people not play this card as much? Is he not as good as people thought he was? And it's like, no, the context has changed. The amount of decks that are running scaling threats is a lot smaller than it used to be. You used to have more wolf decks. You used to have Angela. You used to have Kitty Pryde, Hitmonkey. You had a lot more cards that were Bishop pumping their power, and then Shadow King could swing that lane for a low cost.
Mhm.
And now they still exist, but there aren't they're not as many of those decks. And the thing about Shadow King is you don't want to play Shadow King on 2. So you're holding Shadow King for the whole game, and then that locks you into having to play a 2-drop on the final turn alongside a 4-drop or some other cheaper cards. And a lot of decks can't really afford to do that, especially when it's a dead card in a bunch of matchups. Whereas before, it wasn't a dead card in as many matchups, so it was played a ton when Kitty and Elsa and all these other cards are popular. So like the TLDR is context changes, and people should focus more on the context rather than trying to be like, oh, I saw this before it was, popular. Because it's not impossible, somebody found the optimized Hela list first, right? Like there is, I'm sure, somebody who is slightly ahead of the game. But if you were playing Hela 6 months ago and you thought it was underrated and way better than people were saying, and that's why it's good now, I think there's some context being missed there.
Or, to quote Gabriel Lorca from the first season of Star Trek Discovery, universal laws for lackeys, but context is for kings.
Huh.
Are you a lackey or a king?
I like it.
No, but I think that frankly the context changes so quickly in Snap that it's almost become like an elusive concept to some, right? And I just don't engage with that nonsense.
That's the smart play, is to like, this is another thing that we don't have to talk about it a bunch, but I do think it's worth mentioning. One thing Snap is very successful at, and like why it's successful as a game, is because it creates remarkably different experiences at like different levels of play and whatnot. And those different experiences don't necessarily invalidate each other, right? Like players at the top are getting upset about Hela because they're seeing Hela a lot and it's hard to interact with and it's beating them, and that's frustrating. But a lot of other players are like, what are you talking about? I see Hela maybe 1 in 10 games. It doesn't seem that bad. The Loki discourse was like the prime example of this, because people were really bad at playing Loki and also played it less at smaller ranks, even at Infinite. Like it was really more of a high Infinite problem, and like it creates a state of discourse where people are never going to see eye to eye, and that doesn't make one person or the other person really wrong. It's just like you're looking at different paintings and trying to argue they're like the same thing, kind of, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
so I've slowed down on engaging with a lot of discourse around the game, because like you're not, a lot of times you're not going to convince people, and the experience is just different. So it's like, how can you expect someone to believe, people are going to believe what they experience themselves over what other people are saying most of the time. People trust their own intuition more than what someone else has to say a lot of the time.
So on the theme of trying to, pr provide the correct context and try and make evidence-based decision making, we made, or I made, a declarative statement that Destroy, Hela, and Lockjaw Thanos are three of the best deck archetypes in the game. So let's go ahead and look at the most played builds. And I just want to be clear, oftentimes the most played is not optimized, but it is generally good to understand what people are doing as a baseline. As a side note, I also have the Conquest stats for Untapped as well. And we didn't really focus on those, but they're essentially the same with plus or minus some variance. I tend to like to look at ladder, post-infinite ladder, more than Conquest, because I feel like Proving Grounds really skews the data. Like I
Oh,
like,
you can't sort it by tier in Conquest, huh?
you can do, well, you can do it by one tier or all of them on Untapped. So I tend to really like to look at the infinite Conquest on the last week. But prior to that, it's a bit of a mishmash. Silver's pretty okay, sweaty silver. Sometimes I'll do that. But regardless of how you slice and dice the data, the decks that we talked about clearly are at the top. So the first archetype that I think is plaguing ladder, and I think that it's doing so at all levels, is Hela. So it's interesting is that there were like a few different ways of building Hela as we were kind of building up momentum to what we see here. And I think that the list that you have on screen with Black Knight and Giganto probably is the best performing one.
Yeah, this is the best Hela deck. It's also like it gives you the least amount of chance for stuff to go wrong as well. And also I will say Black Knight is kind of a backup in this deck. Like there are times when he's good, but if you are someone who's on more of a budget, don't feel like you can't play Hela if you don't have Black Knight, or you need Black Knight to be competitive with Hela. Because having played with and against a lot of Hela, Black Knight feels kind of fringe. Like sometimes he's really good. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes you get Black Knight into Sif or Blade and you get a 4-cost Infinite, and that's really helpful in those games where you're not Helaing. So I'm not saying don't get the card, but the power of Hela is not, Black Knight's not the main thing juicing Hela right now. It's just like it helps in those games where you don't get the Hela stuff going. Or you just drop it into Lockjaw if you get it late.
This deck puts out an absurd amount of points, and the thing
It's like
about it
Mr.
is,
Negative, kind of. Like it's almost negative levels of like how much points it puts out.
but it's a lot less fragile to disruption than negative.
Yeah.
The thing about this deck is the higher you are on ladder, the more oppressive it gets, because as you start playing in matches where people are making optimized decisions, if this deck snaps against you, you have to basically have an answer to deal with that number of points or be able to produce more yourself. And so this deck oftentimes, generally speaking, if you don't respect Hela,
They'll take your keeps.
yeah.
You have to, Hela is very hard to snap against, and if they snap you, like you have to figure out how many points they can output total, and if you have any chance of beating that. And like Hela's the deck you need to be leaving against a lot. Is I think KM Best talked about this, and I think his analysis on it is very spot on. Like Hela is not as inconsistent as it used to be. It's actually remarkably consistent, and that 54% win rate is terrifying for a deck that for a long time struggled to hit 50. It might not sound like a lot to some, but this deck is remarkably consistent. It puts out huge power, and it's hard to interact with. That is probably the biggest thing, and that's why people are playing it so much. You may remember a month ago when Sarah Control was being touted as the best deck. You know why Sarah Control fell off the throne, even though it's still a fine deck overall? It's because Hela and Thanos became the popular big stats decks.
Yeah.
And both those decks have ways of Sarah doesn't put out a whole ton of power on her own. She's trying to take away power from the opponents. And Hela is the natural response to that, because the only way you can answer Hela typically is get priority and get lucky with an Alioth or Cosmo. That's probably the least consistent way of doing it, but it can deal with it. You have seen a rise in Spider Hams, although while that can beat Hela sometimes, as someone who's ran into it, well, not even backfiring. It's just like it often doesn't do very much unless you're hitting the Hela. Maybe sometimes like the Dracula or the Jubilee is a good hit too, or the Lockjaw. But Hela's the big hit, right? But how that goes is you play Ham, it hits Hela, you snap, they leave.
Right.
That's just how it goes. Hela's very easy for the Hela player to know when to snap and to know when to leave, and it's often very hard for the person on the end to know when they can snap into Hela. That's it. Just you can't interact with this deck easily. Leech would be the main thing that would interact with it, right? But Leech is having trouble right now because outside of Thanos, and to a lesser extent High Evolutionary, most decks can't afford the tempo loss of Leech. Leech playing a 5/3 is really, really bad on turn 5 most of the time, and most decks don't put out enough stats to safely do that. So that would normally be like a big release valve for Hela, and the most Leech decks are just not very good right now. I've been playing a little bit of Darkhawk Leech, and it's okay.
It's so bad. Yeah.
But like, because you also have disruption that way too, where the rocks are going to insta Lockjaw, and like it can be okay against Hela, but it has a harder time versus a lot of other decks, including Thanos, because of things like Blob, just like blanking your Darkhawk. So it's just really hard to interact with Hela, and she puts out a ton of points that you can't easily deny. And other decks, even if you're not trying to deny their points, most other points decks can't compete with the raw stats that Hela does. Thanos is like probably the main exception here.
There's another exception, and it also happens to be one of the better decks and
Destroy,
one of the most played.
Right? Because of locations. Exactly. Like if Destroy gets the right locations, their power output goes to the moon. It goes a lot higher, so it can reasonably compete with that. And this is how we're kind of getting into that, like, 4 core elements of the meta: Hela, Thanos, Destroy, and Zabu decks.
Yeah, so Destroy is a little bit more fragile than Hela decks, but when it's not disrupted, its point potential is quite a bit higher because of the way it scales with cards like Venom, Null, and Deadpool, right? It's got a lot of scaling potential. And, Destroy hasn't really changed a whole lot, despite nerfs to Hulkbuster, making hand quotes as another side grade. What I find interesting about Destroy is that the stock list, which is a fine deck in its own right, people are kind of replacing some of the cards to try and squeeze like more cubes out of snaps, right? You see this with Zola. I did this a couple months ago, or I didn't do anything. I copied Safety Blade's homework a couple months ago into this Taskmaster to make 2 big Deadpools. Some people do that. Other people are putting in Shang or Eliath. I don't know.
Yeah, you want a cube juicing. You want a cube juicing card, basically, because that's kind of the environment we're in, right? Like when people are being more conservative with their like snaps and retreats, you want to catch them off guard and take them for everything you can, because 1 8 cube win is essentially like winning 8 1 cube games.
Mm-hmm. There's not a whole lot to say about Destroy. Um, I people really who like the archetype really like it. I think it's interesting that this is like the last of the build around archetypes or the hard build around archetypes
Mhm.
from launch that's still really good or maybe better than it has been. Um, so a lot of people kind of have the cards. A lot of people like to play the deck. It has a really high play rate. I find it I don't have a problem with the deck. What I have a problem with is that it seems like the deck's like balance, and you said this before, is really throttled by the locations that are in rotation. So right
Mhm.
now, as we do this podcast, we've got the cloning vats hot location, and like I mean,
There are a
just
lot of destroy players with the cloning vats. The other thing about locations and destroy is it's not simply that destroy has a ton of positive locations, arguably more than any other deck in the game. It's that a lot of the locations that are good for destroy are weighted at a common rarity, so they show up a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Lambie said like a long time ago, this is one of the reasons destroy is great in Conquest because its 13th card are positive locations, that because it just boosts the output of the deck so much more than most other decks in the game.
yeah.
Every deck has a handful of locations that are beneficial to them, except maybe discard. I feel like almost all the locations are not benefiting discard, except maybe you get the discard card one sometimes. But
Hey,
uh,
Sokovia is yeah, okay.
yeah. So, but yeah, this is it's a very real thing, and it's why like I don't think destroy is like inherently overpowered or anything, but I do think, especially in Conquest, it can be very annoying to play again and again and again because you really feel that the locations are determining the outcome of the game more with this deck than I feel like most other decks.
Yeah, I mean, there's not really a whole lot to say. It's just a stats dump without a lot of interaction, and it's a popular deck. There are a lot of people who would say that Destroy being at the top of the meta pile is a sign of a healthy meta. I don't necessarily think that's true without, as you said earlier, zombies context.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something that I think you need to be prepared to have a game plan for if you're trying to win games. Um, so yeah, the third deck, which we've already talked about at length, is Lockjaw Thanos. I think it's worth noting that of the four kind of legs of the table or cornerstones, Lockjaw is in two of the decks and is a central part of projecting its power level.
It makes
Um,
those two decks what they are. Like
yeah,
Lockjaw, there's a reason all the Thanos decks without Lockjaw are worse. There's a reason all the Hela decks without Lockjaw are worse. Lockjaw is probably the best mana cheating card in Snap. You, if you ever look at the meta and wondered, hey, what happened to ramp decks? You remember when people used to play Electro and Wave, and Lockjaw is the new Electro, and
Yep.
he's better Electro. Like he just cheats mana more effectively than like anything else in the game.
the thing too that I find disappointing about Lockjaw Thanos is that it's kind of really gone from it's like the lockdown Thanos that we had in October. You know, kind of it took time to morph into this, right? And so over time, the deck has gone from being more of a deck that disrupts and interacts to just being a stats dump. And I feel like now the last like bastion of reactionary cards in Lockjaw Thanos, of course, outside of the stones itself, is Shang-Chi, right? I mean, Leech has been getting cut from a lot of the lists, and for those that are longtime listeners of Born to Be Cosmo, you will know that I am a Leech fan. I don't like being leeched, but I like playing Leech because it really introduces a lot of certainty of outcome to a game if you can actually pull it off. The fact that we're taking Leech out, is just a concession that we're saying I'd rather just slam 8 to 10 points on turn 5 as opposed to kind of trying to manage a tempo loss to disrupt. And I think Kyera has a lot to do with that. It's a card that doesn't really get talked about a lot because it's so unassuming. The fact
It's
that
also
you're
only played in like one deck.
right, but I feel that
But it's huge in that one deck.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it is
elevated a
unassuming. Like
lot.
people don't. I think a lot of people don't realize how crazy Kyera is in shoring up Thanos's like bigger weaknesses of like its cards being blown up.
It kind of really forced the deck in another direction, because when we were pivoting to Lockjaw Thanos, a lot of us were kind of running it with Death and Killmonger, right? Which was a very kind of classic way of doing it back in the day, especially after Quinjet got its initial nerf. But Kyera makes your 1-drops more premium because you're confident they're gonna stick. And of course, it makes your 6s unshaggable. Nate said before, when you were talking about your infinite climb with the deck, how Cull Obsidian, felt like, oh man, it's shangable. I'm not used to that anymore. I have to actually consider that.
Yeah.
It really makes the deck easier to play because it's a shield that really blocks a lot of the counterplay. It's kind of an interesting thing that it's really forced the deck into this direction. It's really strong, and you'll note too, it has the highest win rate of all the decks that we saw, but the lowest number of games, and that's probably something to do with the fact that there's more variance in builds in Thanos, but also to your point earlier, it kind of is expensive. It's got a lot of Series 5 cards in it. That's something that has to be taken into account.
Yeah, and despite that, it's still really, really popular. Thanos is really, really popular. I do think it probably is the best deck in the game. Once again, not as oppressively so as pre-nerf Blob Thanos, but Cull really gave it a bit of extra juice, particularly with Scar, and
Yeah,
it's
Scar is
just really
actually a lot
good.
better now. You get the discount on Scar, and it feels pretty good.
Yeah.
So, I think that when the meta settles, I find this is true in all card games, that we kind of get tired of the meta, right? That's why we call it the meta.
Yeah.
It's the most common matchups. And so everyone's always trying to um, find the meta breaker or find something off meta that could speak to their inner hipster. And I feel that that's especially true in Marvel Snap. I don't know why that is. That said, I think that some metas lend itself to allow strategies to kind of act as spoilers or kind of weave their way in where they wouldn't have the space otherwise. Other metas don't.
Yeah.
And so I think this meta has a little bit of room, but not as
Yeah.
much as in some. And so I think that where that flexibility comes in are decks that are running Zabu. Right, so when people say like, "Oh, Zabu's a problem card," it kind of is, but I'm also grateful that there is this kind of universal Swiss Army knife engine that really kind of pushes decks that otherwise would not be viable into the forest. So, um, we've been playing quite a bit of Snap, you and I, Zombies, over the last week, and thought maybe we'd have a look at some of the off-meta brews that we've had success with, and perhaps share them with our listeners.
Sure. Yeah. It's definitely a meta where you don't have to play one of the, 4 things, but you're gonna have a much easier time if you do. And Zabu is very much like what you said, a way to play something that's not one of the other top 3 while having a bit more like there's not much you can do with Hela or Thanos in terms of making it different. Some people play the blob samurai version of Hela, but I think people play that more for fun rather than it being good. I've played it a bunch. I really don't like it as much as the other versions. Like there's a lot more potential for stuff to go wrong in that deck
Yeah.
compared to the stock Hela, and doesn't feel like there's a positive trade-off for that downside.
So one of the decks that I've been really playing a lot of games with is a deck called Easy Mode, created by our good friend Safety Blade. This was one of the decks that Safety Blade theory crafted when Beta Ray Bill came out at the end of last season. And I ended up picking up Beta Ray Bill because I really like Lockjaw, although I suppose for as long as Doggy lives, because maybe in the next OTA, Lockjaw will be sent back to the pound. This deck doesn't run Lockjaw, but it does run Zabu, and we are playing 4 premium 1-drops with a reactive package, Shang and Enchantress. We have some points generation with Beta Ray Bill and Miss Marvel, and we round this out with Jane Foster to draw the hammers from Beta Ray and Thor, and a bunch of tech cards. And the reason that I think this deck has been performing pretty well is because people are not expecting to see 3 of the tech cards that make up this deck in the form of Shadow King, Scarlet Witch, and Killmonger.
Even
And
Enchantress, I think, probably catches people off guard with this one.
you could be right. The way that some people have been playing into me, I question it. I think that people that are savvy of the meta would probably expect Enchantress more than perhaps some of the others. But yeah, I've had some ongoing heavy decks that kind of left their belly exposed to me and lost a lot of cubes. So yeah, I think that you know, I'm generally not a fan of pushing off meta decks that people will then play and be frustrated with. I think that this is harder to play by virtue of being lower power level than the meta tyrants, but I am confident that this deck is a solid performer. I have gotten 2 infinite tickets with it in Conquest, and I've climbed almost 400 SP on ladder with this as well, from about 7,100 to 7,500. So definitely not the top of ladder by any stretch, but you know, pretty comfortable in the mid. You know, and I think that this has been something that I can recommend. One thing that you may want to consider is instead of running Mobius, you may want to run Ghost. I do not do this because as much as I am a Ghost enjoyer, I am not a fan of getting Eliathed.
Mm.
Especially
It's calmed
when,
down a little because
yeah,
Super Giant Week it was out in full force. Super Giant was the hey, all the Alioth enjoyers gonna come out to play again,
right.
and now that Super Giant Week is over, that seems to have calmed down a bit.
And this is why I'm bringing it up, because Ghost kind of covers one of the things that one can struggle with this deck, which is managing priority. Generally speaking, there are going to be situations where you're going to want to throw priority, and Ghost is just a card you can slam to do that. If you want to keep priority, you don't have to play Ghost. But I find that you can navigate that challenge through judicious placement. But yeah,
It's hard though sometimes. Like I do think there definitely is merit to Ghost in this deck because this deck does put out decent stats. So sometimes it is really hard to actually throw priority. And not only do you want to throw priority because you are a reactive deck with a lot of your reactive cards, you also want to throw priority so your opponent can't Shang your Bill or your Thor. Because that was one of the biggest issues that these type of decks had when Bill came out was, oh, I made a really big guy. Oh, it's dead. I like to call this deck it's like 3 Thors and a Sarah trench coat basically because this is
no, it is.
It's Sarah control but you're running Thor cards instead of Sarah and like it's cool because it works and you get to play these fun cards and so it feels a little bit different but the main reason it's so good is because you're essentially playing a lot of the best cards of Sarah control but subbing in some of the Thor stuff so as a bigger power output rather than having more cost reduction stuff in Sarah.
Yeah, I think for me the real test of this deck is, am I confident enough to play it on ladder without, you know, precipitously falling, and it's been a real solid performer. You know, you will struggle against Destroy until you learn that matchup with this deck. Ghost does make that matchup a lot easier unless they're running Goliath. But yeah, no, I think it's really cool. I really like Scarlet Witch. I really like having something that can disrupt locations.
That's the cube juicer, right? Because that's like it deals with high evo, it deals with the magic combo decks. Like they don't expect it at all from this deck.
It's also nice to turn off flooding, or
Yeah,
if you have just a you know, a crummy location that you don't want. I'm a big Scarlet Witch enjoyer. I always like to have it in my Sarah control lists. It's fun that it's here. Shadow King is also really, really good. It's not as universally good as it was in previous metas, but it's a big reason why this deck can
dunks
queue
destroy so hard.
Yeah, Mobius and Shadow King, or Ghost and Shadow King are really good against Destroy. Yeah, it's just I don't really have a whole lot more to say about it. I think that if you are interested in playing this deck, you should check out Safety Blade's Beta Ray Bill theory crafting article on Marvel Snap Zone, where Safety Blade shares their thoughts on this deck. It's been a really good performer, and actually I've been playing it so much, the deck stats are up on Untapped, and you know. Feeling pretty good about the numbers that it's putting up. So yeah, definitely if you're looking for something that's different but still viable, at least for the next 2 weeks until the next OTA, I think this deck will be a pretty solid performer.
Yeah, it's a good deck overall, and it's fun to play. It's a little bit different than the other stuff, so that's refreshing. One thing I did want to add, and I meant to mention this in the Hela section, but I forgot. Uh, Another reason Hela and like the other decks have gotten so much better. I think a huge thing that people don't really talk about is the death of Professor X. Professor
Oh, I
X
didn't think about that.
stopped
Yeah.
Hela decks from doing their thing a lot of the time. Professor X was just like, in a way, it's one of those things where it's like, I wish Professor X would not be played anymore, and the monkey's paw curls. And now we're
Yeah,
seeing
yeah. That's a
Hela and
really good
Destroy and
point.
all this stuff. I think that's the card people are forgetting about a lot, where that nerf really knocked that card out of the game, and Storm doesn't cut it for stopping stuff like Hela because their stuff goes there anyway. But Professor X said, "Hey, if I'm winning this lane, I'm winning this lane most of the time."
Yep.
So I just wanted to bring that up because I forgot to mention it earlier.
Hashtag revert Professor X.
I can people would probably be not very happy about that, but I do think it would probably change things from how they are right now.
Well, you played a lot of different decks this week as well, and you had a few experiments that I think were noteworthy. So yeah, why don't you tell us about this pile, this Zabu pile? They're all
Yeah,
Zabu piles.
the Dongus special. Yeah, I didn't make this deck. I credited the person who did over on Twitter, Chris. I believe he's a German player. I want to say. I could be wrong. I'm sorry if I am wrong. But anyway, he posts some cool stuff. He's a fairly high ladder player. I think he plays higher up than I do. I think he's usually in the top like 300-400 or something.
Okay.
And he posted this list shortly after Cull Obsidian dropped. I added Gladiator to it. He wanted to add Gladiator but didn't have it, and he's getting that tomorrow. So he's probably going to put it in there once that card becomes more
Look at the
available.
stats on these cards. It's just like all the
They're
cheap
big.
overstatted like 4 and 3 drops, and then Maximus.
Mhm.
That's kind of
You just
diabolical.
play
Yeah.
big stats, and you don't have any reactive tools, but you're just trying to outstat your opponent. Also, so we've been talking about like cube juicers quite a bit. The way this deck juices cubes sometimes is people like get tunnel vision with Shang-Chi a lot of the time. They'll see you have a big lane and they think they're going to flip that lane, and then they snap you, and then you snap them back and play Cosmo or Armor, and then they get sad. So that's been like a big cube juicer. Sometimes Cosmo can help you like snipe the Hela, though it's rare. You have the Annihilus package, so that makes your Sentry and Hood a bit better. Though you can still play those cards without Annihilus in certain situations. Sometimes Cull Obsidian's a little awkward because you only have 2 1-drops, 3 if you get the Hood and have the Demon. But sometimes he's a little tricky, and then Cosmo shuts off your negative effects, right? Like if you want to play Sentry, but you don't have Annihilus, you can just hide him behind Cosmo. Same with Maximus or Gladiator if you don't want to risk it. Zero shuts off those negative effects too, usually using that on a Tuma if I don't find Armor. But yeah, you just try and play a lot of big stats, and then that rewards you with a cheaper Scar at the end of the game, which is good. It just puts out a lot of power and has ways of protecting it. Also is decent into Destroy, because if you hit them with the Armor and
Armor Osmo.
Cosmo, they have a hard time a lot of the times dealing with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I love high Evo for ladder, for
Yeah.
pre-infinite ladder.
Yeah,
And
Played a
there's
lot of
so
it,
much
too.
destroy, and I run the Cosmo armor package. I don't run Kyera, and I do own Kyera, and I think it's a fine choice. But like, I love like love dumping on destroy because like it's so easy to identify on ladder if your opponent is destroy. And then once you do, if you have a key card and an opportunity, you can snap early. And more often than not, they'll stay. They'll be like, "Oh, I've got my Deadpool down. Why would I leave when they snap?" And then you give it a big armor hug, and then you get 2 cubes. So armor Cosmo, good if you're seeing a lot of destroy, definitely. And yeah, I like using these protective tools in a reactive way. I think that's a fun thing to do. But if you're a destroy enjoyer, then well, probably not so much fun to be on the
Yeah, it's
receiving end of that.
one-sided fun there. And I had one other one. I don't know if you want to show it. I just posted it in the chat. There was one
Oh
other
yeah,
deck I
this
really
is the
liked.
one I was thinking of actually when I was asking you earlier. So
Mhm.
I'm glad you opted to share this because this was really fun to watch you play on stream.
It's a
Probably the
very fun deck.
most adventurous of the 3 options that we'll be sharing with you today.
Definitely.
So buyer beware, but
Hard to
it's
play too. I think it's
yeah.
actually a very hard to play deck. So it's rewarding when it works, but it does have a cube juicing element, which is Heimdall. And I know longtime snappers might be thinking about the most iconic play in Marvel Snap, which is Heimdall into lose. But this deck doesn't do that a whole ton. And it's because people don't know you're a Heimdall deck. Like, when they see all the move cards and whatnot, maybe they're thinking about Magneto, or just the other standard move your opponent's stuff cards, Juggernaut, whatever. Nobody's thinking about Heimdall. And Heimdall is a big part of what makes this deck work. It can win without him, but a big thing is you end up stacking a Jean Grey lane, and it kind of, you can very easily trick your opponent into thinking your power is going one place when it's actually going somewhere else. And I've found that has led to very large cube gains. Ghost Spider's been really good with that too. She's our other 2099 enabler, but not just here for 2099. Another really cool play that I've liked is you pull one of their big things with arrow, and then naturally most people think, oh, they put a big thing, their arrow is in the same lane as my big thing. We're going to fight for that lane because we're both invested. And then you just yoink the ghost, use the ghost spider to yoink your 5/9 out of there, and then they overcommit and end up putting more power into a lane they were already going to win, but they didn't think they were going to win. So that's been really cool. And then Heimdall, it's really like the thing about Heimdall is you have to be thinking about your card positioning from the very first turn because like it all matters. Nebula is really cool with Jean Grey because you get Nebula down early and then you put Jean somewhere else and it makes it awkward, especially for decks that just want to play one card on the final turn. Makes things kind of strange for them, and especially when they think you have to play your final card into the Jean lane, and you do, and then it's Heimdall and all your stuff moves, or if you fill up the Jean lane on 5 and then play something else in a different lane, it's just a really fun way to play move. I've always liked the move stuff. Arrow's my favorite card. I changed my name to Arrow Enjoyer on ladder. I joined the Enjoyers Club. And this has been my favorite way to play. And you get to play 2099, and it's not copium, I swear. Like 2099 has actually won me some games. It's obviously a little bit more telegraphed, but people still don't really expect the Heimdall. The biggest advice on 2099 in this deck is 5/9s are big. Don't always assume you have to go for the value of him killing something. Like, there are a bunch of times when him killing something is good and can help you get a lane, but the amount of times I've also just used Ghost Spider to pull my arrow and then just play 2099 as a body to win a game has also been pretty high. So don't just assume you need to get value out of his effect. It can be good to get value out of his effect, but it's not required in order for you to play the card every game. And obviously he's good with Heimdall because he's a lot of power and he can help you compete for a lane where your opponent has a lot of power. Because you're putting a 5/9 and then presumably if you're moving him, deleting one of the things. One of my favorite moments was taking down a Taskmaster from a Shuri player with 2099. That was probably the biggest highlight for me. And also most of your stuff doesn't die to Shang-Chi. The only thing that's weak to Shang usually is sometimes the Craven, but usually that's at the final turn of the game because you like move a bunch of stuff with Heimdall. So you're resilient to tech cards, which is something I really like about it. And instead of running tech cards yourself, you're kind of relying on surprising your opponent with where your final power output is going to be, rather than just trying to flip a lane with a Shang-Chi or something.
So I have a 2099 question for you.
Sure.
Are you the biggest Spider-Man 2099 fan in Marvel Snap?
Maybe right now. You know, it's funny. So I asked the team question about 2099, and was basically like, hey, so the intention of the 2099 change was, you know, experiment with higher cost move cards while the team determines, do we want to pursue some other kind of direction or other buffs for this card? Now that it's been, you know, a few weeks since the change, has the play rate and performance rate of 2099 improved at his new 5.9 stat line compared to 4.6? And I got a reply, and the answer was basically his play rate has gone up quite a bit, and his performance rate has gone up slightly. I like the card a lot better at 5.9 than 4.6. I know that might be a hot take. I do understand for the people who ran like core traditional move decks with like basically regular Heimdall decks, not like the one I'm playing here where it's move your opponent stuff. But because they can use like cloak and move him around, and you can't really do that as much when he costs 5. But for me, I just really didn't like him as a 4.6, and at 5.9, I've actually really enjoyed playing with him. So I'm kind of hoping they leave him where he is for a while because I like playing with it.
There you go. So you've got a few different choices if you're looking for something to play that range from different but viable to also different, viable, but maybe on the more spicy side of things.
One last big tip: don't show the Heimdall if you're not getting. You want to get more than 2 cubes out of your Heimdall, because especially this is more of a Conquest tip. But if you're in a Conquest game with this deck, don't be showing the Heimdall for 1 or 2 cubes. If you're going to be Heimdalling and showing it, you want to get at least 4, because it's all about that cube equity. And once they know it's there, then they start to think about it and try and play around it. Whereas you can sometimes bait people. They think you have no way of winning. You snap them, or they snap you and you snap back, and all of a sudden you take them for 4 or for 8, and then you're in a very ahead position for the rest of the game.
All right. Well, you're hearing it from the premier Spider-Man 2099 Marvel Snap gamer, ZombiesGoNomNom. It's funny that you say like, oh, I know a lot of people aren't happy about the change. I wonder how many, like, I'm sure there are people that played 2099, but they probably are in the extreme minority because
there were a lot of people who were either unhappy because it made it worse in their move deck, or unhappy because, you know, it took them like 7 months to finally buff this card, and it wasn't the buff a lot of people wanted.
Fair enough. Well, you know, I think that takes us to the bottom of our agenda. I am curious, though. We're probably going to come together again after the next shop takeover has completed in about 10 days' time. So it's going to be an art germ takeover this month, which means that all the cards are going to cost 1,200, I assume.
I think so. There's also one more album aside from the Art Germ album, and I assume that's going to be, for those who haven't heard, they said one album this month is not going to require 12 variants to complete it.
Interesting.
And I assume that's not the Art Germ one.
Right.
So we'll probably find out about that tomorrow. They've been doing an album every week this month, and I have to say, despite a rocky launch to the album system, I think this month has had a lot of improvements to it with like the Pixel albums and more Dan Hip stuff. And I'm feeling like albums feel like what I think they should have been, which is more of a bonus rather than just something for only whales to engage with. Like that Pixel Destroy album came up, and I had half of those pixels from just opening them randomly. So I got, I think it was tokens, like 2K tokens. Tokens or credits, I don't remember. But I got a very silly pixel avatar and some resources for not doing anything. And I think that is a much better thing for like I think more albums and albums that like you can naturally obtain without having to spend a bunch of money to get some bonuses is a much better way for for people to enjoy the system. And of course, you'll still have people who want to whale out and get all the things, and that's fine.
Are-
But
Are you planning on getting any of the art term variants that are releasing on the 29th?
I like a bunch of them. I'm not planning on buying any of them
Okay.
because I'm kind of at the point where I have a variant I want for most cards, and I basically am only spending gold for the most part on continuing my Rian Gonzalez variant collection,
Right.
which
Yes.
I believe that is having 2 new ones tomorrow as well in Storm and Ironheart. So I've been saving gold for that, and I also use gold on the Rian bundle for the cool
Sarah.
Sarah recently.
Are you going to be getting any of the variants, Nate, on the takeover?
Probably not. I mean, gosh, Artgerm art is amazing, but like
Like this
I don't
Loki's
know.
fantastic.
If
but-
any, it'd be the Loki. I mean, gosh, I love them all, but I just can't justify the price tag. They're cool though.
Yeah.
There are a couple like newly released ones that I'm looking forward to. There's an upcoming Venomized thing that I'll be purchasing, and that Spider-Man Hulk I'll be getting
Right.
for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
But no, the Artgerm stuff probably not. I love it. It's beautiful, but I don't think I'll be spending the money on it.
Fair enough. I think I'm gonna probably get the Loki that you put on the screen. If I get anything,
yeah,
it'll
that's
be
the
that.
best one, I think.
I think that's it. Because 1200's a lot. So if
Yep.
there's an art germ album, I do
And
have
Storm
a
is the album reward, I believe. The Artgerm Storm is the reward for
Oh,
that
okay.
final reward. Well,
That's
actually
kinda
not final, but the variant reward.
variant reward. Yeah, we'll see. I've got a couple of random art germs. I suspect I will have maybe 2 out of however many are in that album. But yeah, I think the shop takeovers are pretty cool. I think they're still struggling to keep up with the variants. The releases have seemed to slowed, but the ones that are coming are pretty awesome. All the variants that you guys are looking forward to getting are really nice. Yeah, so it continues to be the art and splitting the art, so to speak, seems to be what we always joke the main game mode. Will probably continue to be the case.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. So I think we'll call it there. I'm not sure if you guys had anything else you wanted to cover before we call it.
I think that about wraps it up. By the time we reconvene, the next 2 cards will be out, and will it be a new season? When's the new season? So new card. Yeah, it
First
will
Tuesday of
be.
March.
Yeah, so it'll be about new season time, roughly.
Good.
So we'll have a bunch of stuff to talk about. We'll also have an OTA to talk about, which is scheduled, I believe, for the 29th.
Yep.
And maybe even, depending on how we time it, a patch that comes with the new season.
I'm gonna go buy a 40 of malt liquor so I can pour it out for Lockjaw when they kill my boy on the
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, here that's maybe a good thing to end on is what do you think might be changing in either the OTA or the patch in like a week or 2?
Lockjaw. I think that it's a problem. It's one of my favorite cards. I've played so much of it. It's always been good, even when it wasn't meta, because of the amount of stupid that it can do. I think that that's probably going to both take Thanos and Hela down a peg. That's my prediction. I think it's a pretty low, like it's not a real hot take to think that that's a card that is probably under consideration or evaluation right now.
Yeah, I think that's probably the easy pick. It's also the I think the real challenging thing is if I think about a lot of the decks that are on top right now, if I were in the position of what would I change, I don't really have a good answer outside of Lockjaw. Like, I don't know what I'd change in Thanos. I don't know what I'd change in Hela. In the past, there have been times where it felt like there was a relatively easy answer. Like, oh, Blob was really overpowered. They need to nerf Blob. but I think the power is so spread out in a lot of the decks currently, especially the Zabu and the Destroy decks. It's like hard. I'm very curious to see if they end up going through with the Destroy nerf or not, though. So my prediction will be, I don't necessarily think they're going to, but I think it's possible. So, and if they do, I imagine we're going to get, for those who didn't see it, there was a little oopsie on the website last OTA where they had a 4/5 Venom. That seems like it was going to be their other choice, and they went with Hulkbuster instead. So if Destroy is outside of wherever they want it to be, hitting one of the Destroy effects to be 1 energy more probably slows it down enough for other decks to kind of make a bit of headway. So I guess that'll be my prediction.
It's also possible they might hit. I don't know. Never mind. I revoke it. I'm gonna stick with my one prediction of.
It was a good
Lockjaw.
prediction.
Yeah, I think
there's
the other one I was thinking of that I don't even want to vocalize is probably a little too out there. You just finished your climb, Nate. What do you think they're gonna hit?
That's, it's tricky. I mean, Lockjaw is as good of a guess as any. Maybe Hela, but I don't know. I think that Hela's not worth hitting directly. I think that you
Hela
get at it
herself
through-
isn't really the problem card, right?
Right.
Oh.
So I don't know. There's no card at the moment that stands out to me as particularly problematic outside of Lockjaw, and I say that begrudgingly because I'm a Lockjaw enjoyer.
Yeah.
And I don't think really that Cull Obsidian is worth looking at this early unless the numbers are just
No way.
But I don't think so. So yeah, I mean, I wish I had a better answer, but I can't really think of anything else.
I mean, I think that's a fine answer. I think that speaks
Yeah.
to it's hard to pick what might be on the supposed chopping block. I know when that is the case, a lot of times people are like, well, maybe they should buff stuff instead of nerfing stuff. And while that's a fine opinion to have, the reason nerfs usually are more impactful than buffs is because it's easier to triangulate when a specific card is overperforming rather than guess, hey, if we buff this card by X, will that actually have a meaningful result?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure
it's easier
that
to take something down than to bring it up, essentially.
they can look at cards and see what the play rate is if it's really low or whatever, but it's not going to, like you said, it's not going to have the same impact. And they couldn't guarantee that people are even going to play those. I mean, it'd be cute to, like you said earlier, maybe like the Agent 13, Captain America buff type of thing. But I agree. It would be easier to take something down a peg and you'll get measurable results instantly as opposed to buffing a card and then you've got to see if people even play it.
Yeah.
Ebony Blade's kind of annoying. I wonder if eventually they'll change to take off one of the 2 bonuses.
I could see that happening where it's like not both indestructible and can't be reduced.
But they won't. But if they did that, that wouldn't. I think that's just me being irritated at Ebony Blade because I tend to like to play reactive decks. I don't think that's what's gonna make or break Hela. So I don't.
Yeah,
know
I don't think it would make or break Hela either.
One thing though, if I were to request of everyone is that if you happen to not see the card that you would like nerfed when the OTA is released, or something that is nerfed that you do enjoy that you didn't want to see nerfed, try to not be, unkind to others if they have an opinion different than yours. I feel like the discourse of late has been really pitched, especially online and social media. People deck shaming, calling other people unkind things because they're running cards like Leech.
That's not very Cosmo.
Yeah.
Well, you know how we can keep it Cosmo, especially towards our green friends like Leech. I don't know if you want to pull up the thing I posted earlier. KM Best posted this meme that I thought was very a light heart note to end on. If you scroll up a little in the chat, it's pretty funny. It's very much tongue in cheek, but it's also like kind of It's just kind of funny. Yeah, stop making green cards. I really like this. Cards were not meant to be colored green. Years of green cards, yet no card has been positively received if green. Want to make a green card anyways? We have a color for that. It was called blue. Yes, I love playing Leech. Please give me only Leech players. Statements dreamed up by the utterly deranged. Look at what Glenn Jones has been demanding your respect for. With all the money we spend on the game, these are real cards designed by real people. You just see Leech and Leader and Hela. Hello, I would like to see Loki on turn 3. Glenn has played us for absolute fools.
That's
This
really
was just
funny.
this was a great meme because like it's just a funny trend that a lot of cards that people have particularly disliked playing against in the past year or so all happen to be green.
All right, well that's
That's pretty
awesome. I
cool.
hadn't seen this yet, so that was really amusing. All right, well, I want to thank everyone for listening, and I also would like to thank Nate and Zombies for accommodating my insane schedule. Yes, we're doing this on a Monday night, and that's mostly because of my
It's a holiday
inflexibility, so
in the
thank
US.
you so much. Yeah, it's a holiday here too. Well, some places that Nate had to work today, so thank you for agreeing to do this after a long day at work. I really
Absolutely.
appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
And we'll catch you next time. Until then, keep it Cosmo.
Keep it Cosmo.
Keep it Cosmo.
Enough said, bub.